this message begins, I want you to know something about what you are about to receive. This is not a casual word. This is not something assembled to fill time or to say what sounds good. What I am about to say has been placed in front of you at a specific hour for a specific reason. So if you can, take a breath. Set down whatever else is competing for your attention right now. Because what I have to share with you today is not for the person you were 3 years ago. It is not for who you are on your best day. It is for who you have been in the quiet. The version of you that kept going when keeping going was the hardest thing you had ever done. And I want to say something before we go any further. What I am about to tell you, I speak with reverence and humility. I am not claiming to be the voice of God. But I do believe there are words that the Spirit places on the heart of a messenger for a specific person at a specific hour, and I believe this is one of those moments. So, receive it as such, not as performance, not a content, but as a word that was carried here for you. Now, let me say something to you plainly. Chosen one, you know exactly what I am talking about when I say, there was a season when you carried something that had no name, a weight that did not fit neatly into any category. Not quite grief, not quite fear, not quite exhaustion, but something made of all three pressed together into a silence you wore without complaint. A season when the cost was real, and the recognition was absent, and the end was nowhere visible. You did not just survive that season. You demonstrated something in it. And here is what I need you to understand before this message goes any further, because it is the thing that changes the entire lens through which you see what you have been through. There are beings who stand in the presence of God every moment of every day. Beings designed for glory, for unwavering light, for the fullness of divine presence without interruption. They do not know what it costs to choose faith when faith feels like falling. They do not know what it takes to keep extending love from a hand that has been wounded. That is not their assignment. It was yours. And when God watched you carry what you carried the way that you carried it, He looked at the angels beside His throne and said something about you that silenced the room. What He said is what this entire message is built to deliver to you, and you did not arrive here by accident. You were brought here because it is time you finally heard it. That is the word being carried in this message, and I want you to sit with it for just a moment before we go deeper, because I know what happens when you hear something like that. Something in you wants to receive it, and something else in you immediately starts to question it. That voice that says, is this really for me? Am I really who this message is talking about? And I want to tell you right now, that question is exactly what we are going to address over the course of what I am about to share with you. Because the fact that you are questioning it does not mean it is not true. It means you have not yet received the full picture of what you did. And that is what we are going to build together. Stay with me, because what I am about to share changes everything. Let me speak to what has been hidden. Let me speak to the season that most people in your life did not fully know about. The one that lived mostly in the quiet, in the private hours, in the thoughts you kept to yourself because the full weight of them was too heavy to hand to another person. There was a cost to what you walked through, a real cost, not a metaphorical one, not a spiritual one that lives in the abstract, a cost that landed in your body, in your certainty, in the part of you that used to feel clear about who you were and where you were going. And in that season, that clarity went somewhere, and you had to keep moving without it. You carried it when no one asked if you were okay. You carried it when the answers stopped arriving and the silence started to feel like its own kind of answer. You carried it when the people you expected to stand with you stepped back, not out of cruelty, but because what you were holding was beyond what they knew how to hold. You carried it when the morning came again, and there was no indication that today would be any different from yesterday. You carried it in the middle of normal conversations, in the middle of ordinary days, while wearing a face that said, "You were fine," when the truth was something much more complicated than fine. You carried it in rooms full of people who had no idea what was living behind your eyes. And the specific texture of what you carried, the part that I want to name because most messages skip past it, is this. It was not just heavy, it was invisible. The people around you could see you moving, functioning, showing up, doing what needed to be done, but they could not see what it was costing you to do it. They could not see the internal machinery that was working at a level far beyond what the external circumstances seemed to require. They did not know that what looked like a normal day to them was, for you, an act of extraordinary endurance. That is the part I want to honor before I go anywhere else, because the invisible weight is the heaviest kind. When pain has a name, when it has a visible wound, when it is legible to the people around you, there is support available, there is comfort, there is space for others to step in. But when the weight lives in a place that no one else has access to, when the cost is carried in the private rooms of your spirit, you carry it alone. And carrying something heavy in the dark requires a different kind of strength than carrying it in the light. You know what I am talking about. Before I go further, I want to tell you something important about this message, because what I am about to share over the course of this entire conversation is not something I want you to miss any part of. I am going to show you what God was actually doing in the season that felt like nothing was happening. I am going to tell you specifically what He said about you when He watched how you handled it. I am going to reveal the precise reason why this particular weight was given to you and not someone else. And at the very end, I am going to speak something over your life that I believe will stay with you long after this message is over. So stay. What is ahead of you in this message is the word you have been waiting to receive. Now, let me name the specific forms of what you carried, because invisible weight has textures, and naming the texture is the first step toward understanding why it was so significant. The first form is the weight of decision fatigue without guidance. You were in a season where important decisions needed to be made, ones that would affect the direction of your life in real and lasting ways. And you had to make them without clear instruction, without a sign, without a feeling of confirmation that what you were choosing was right. You had to choose in the fog, not knowing if the path you were walking was the right one, and you chose anyway. And then you carried the uncertainty of that choice while still being required to function as if the uncertainty were not there. The second form is the weight of faithfulness without feedback. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from giving your best to something and receiving no signal about whether it is working, whether it matters, whether it is being received at all. You gave this season your best, your real best. Not the curated version, not the polished version, but the raw and costly version that comes from someone who genuinely believes even when believing is hard. And the feedback was quiet, and you kept giving anyway. The third form is the weight of love without reciprocity. There were people in your life this season to whom you extended grace, patience, understanding, generosity, presence, and forgiveness, and not all of them gave you the same back. Some of them took without understanding the cost. Some of them wounded you and then moved forward as if the wound had not happened. And you made the choice, again and again, to love without the guarantee that the love would be honored. That is not weakness. That is extraordinary, and it deserves to be named as such. The fourth form is the weight of endurance without a timeline. There is a particular anguish in not knowing when something will end. If someone tells you a hard thing will last 6 weeks, You can orient yourself to that. You can pace yourself. You can hold on with a specific horizon in view. But when the hard thing has no end date, when it stretches beyond what you anticipated into territory that has no map, the endurance required is a completely different category. You did not know when it would end. You endured anyway. The fifth form is the weight of hope under attack. There were moments in this season when hope felt genuinely irrational, when the evidence in front of you pointed in a direction that hope disagreed with, when holding on to the belief that things would shift required you to actively resist what was visible, and the resistance was costly. Every day you had to choose hope again, not because it was easy, not because it felt good, but because the alternative was something you refused to become. And the sixth form, and this is the one I believe sits heaviest in the spirit of most of the people this message is for, the weight of grace maintained at personal cost. You chose, in the middle of your own pain, to treat people well, to not retaliate, to not dissolve into bitterness, to not let what was being done to you become what you started doing to others. You maintained a quality of character in the middle of a season that would have justified character compromise. And no one may have ever said thank you for that, but it was seen. I want you to hear me clearly on this. That was not weakness. That was not you being walked over. That was not you being too passive or too soft or too slow to protect yourself. What you just walked through was the specific combination of endurance that requires the deepest and most rare internal resources a human soul possesses. And you produced all 6 of those in the same season, at the same time, without an audience, without a reward, and without a guarantee. That is extraordinary. And I want to show you something now, because I think some of you are not fully aware of what was happening inside you while all of that was happening around you. Your spirit was operating at a level that your mind and your body could barely keep up with. And there are signs of that. Real signs that showed up in the texture of your daily experience. Signs that most people around you probably did not notice, and that you yourself may have attributed to stress or fatigue or something being wrong with you. I want to show you what they actually were. The first sign is the experience of unexplained peace arriving at the wrong moment. Not the calm you manufactured, not the peace you talked yourself into, but a peace that arrived in the middle of a situation where peace had no logical right to be there. You were in the middle of something hard, something uncertain, something that was asking more of you than you felt you had. And for a moment, sometimes just a brief moment, something settled, something quieted, and you felt, however briefly, held by something you could not name. That was not your nervous system giving up. That was your spirit making contact with a frequency that your circumstances were not generating. It was the peace that does not come from understanding the situation. It was the peace that comes from something larger than the situation deciding to step in. The second sign is what I want to call moments of clarity arriving at the wrong speed. There were times in this season when you should not have been able to think clearly, when the emotional load should have made precision thinking impossible, and yet a thought arrived, a specific one, an insight that cut through the fog in a way that your own depleted mental resources could not have produced on their own. You may have called it intuition. You may have called it luck. What it actually was is your spirit operating on a frequency that bypasses the limitations of an exhausted, conscious mind. The third sign is the one that most people feel some guilt about, and I want to address it directly. It is the change in what you could tolerate. In this season, things that used to feel fine started to feel draining. Conversations that used to pass without notice started to feel hollow. Environments that used to be comfortable started to feel suffocating. And you may have wondered if something was wrong with you, if you were becoming too difficult, too withdrawn, too sensitive. You were not. What was happening is that your spirit was being elevated in frequency. And when your frequency rises, the things that used to be in alignment with where you were begin to fall out of resonance with where you are going. The intolerance was not a problem. It was a signal. It was your interior compass recalibrating itself around a higher destination. The fourth sign is the recurring thoughts that felt more like instructions than ideas, not the anxious cycling that comes from a worried mind, but specific, directional thoughts that kept returning with a quality that felt different from your usual thinking. A thought about a relationship, a thought about a direction, a thought about something you needed to release or something you needed to hold more carefully. These thoughts kept coming back not because you could not stop thinking about them, but because they were being placed there for a reason. The fifth sign is what I want to call the settled knowing underneath the uncertainty. At the surface level of your experience, things were uncertain. You did not know how things were going to resolve. You did not have a clear picture of what was coming. But underneath the uncertainty, underneath the layer of not knowing, there was something in you that did not fully panic. Something that, even in the darkest moments, maintained a low and steady signal that said, "This is not where it ends." It could be drowned out by the noise of the difficulty, but it was there. That was not wishful thinking. That was your spirit already receiving information your conscious mind had not yet been given access to. And the sixth sign, and this is the one I want you to receive very carefully, the inability to be satisfied by shallow distractions. In this season, the things that used to offer relief stopped offering it the same way. Entertainment that used to feel enjoyable felt hollow. Things that used to be enough were no longer enough. And you may have interpreted that as numbness, as something being broken in you. It was not numbness. It was the sign of a soul in a season so significant that it could not afford to be pacified by things that were not real enough to matter. Your spirit knew that what was happening was too important for the kind of escape that shallow things offer. It was protecting the depth of what you were carrying by refusing to let it be cheapened. And here is what I want you to notice about all 6 of those signs. None of them were symptoms of something going wrong. Every single one of them was evidence of something extraordinary going right. Your spirit was operating at a level that the visible circumstances of your life did not reflect. And while you were showing up to the external world, looking like someone managing a hard season, something in you was actually functioning at a frequency that very few people ever access. Now, I want to tell you something about what was happening in a dimension you could not see, while all of this was happening in the dimension you were living in. There is a record. I want you to hold that thought, because I am going to come back to it, but I want to plant it now. There is a record of what you did in that season, a record that exists in a dimension not subject to the same forgetting that human memory is. And what was being recorded was not just the fact that you endured. It was the quality of the endurance, the specifics of each choice, the particular grace of each moment where you could have chosen differently and did not. Heaven was not absent during your season. Heaven was taking notes. And while you were carrying what you were carrying, something was being documented, something was being evaluated. And when the evaluation reached a certain point of completion, something happened in a room you could not see. Something was said. I am going to tell you exactly what was said before this message is over. But first, I need to take you through a series of truths that will make what was said land the way it needs to land. Because if I told you right now, without building toward it, you would hear the words, but you would not feel the full reality of them. So stay with me, because what we are building toward is the specific word that God spoke about you when he turned to the angels beside his throne and drew their attention to what you had done. And there is something else I need to show you, something about the nature of those very angels, something about what they are capable of and what they were never designed to do. Because when you understand that, what God said about you is going to arrive with a weight that no amount of simple encouragement could carry. But first, let me give you the foundation. What felt like abandonment was actually observation. What felt like silence was actually documentation. What felt like being left behind was actually being set apart. What felt like the worst season of your life was actually the season where the most important things about who you are were being formed, tested, and confirmed. That is not a platitude. That is the lens through which I need you to receive everything that follows. The wilderness was not the enemy of your story. The wilderness was the location where your story was being written. And the person who walked into that wilderness and the person who is in this message on the other side of it are not the same person. Something was formed in you that was not there before, and what was formed is the very thing that created the basis for what God said. We are going to go into that formation now, because before I can tell you what God said, I need to take you back to what was actually happening inside the hard season. What was being built that you could not see from where you were standing? I want to take you back before I take you forward, and I need you to approach what I am about to say not as a recap of something you already lived through, but as an excavation. We are not going back to revisit the pain. We are going back to dig underneath it. Because underneath the visible difficulty, underneath the timeline and the circumstances and the specific events that made the season hard, something was happening that had nothing to do with any of those things. Something was being built. And the first major truth I want to name for you, the first piece of what this message is constructed to deliver, is this. The season you endured was not just hard. It was formative in a way that most people never experience, because most people never consent to remain inside it long enough for the formation to complete. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Most people never remain inside it long enough for the formation to complete. You did. You stayed. Not because staying was easy. Not because you always believed staying was the right choice. Not because you had a clear timeline or a confirmed outcome or a sense that the suffering was productive while you were inside it. You stayed because something in you, something deeper than your preferences, something more stubborn than your exhaustion, something that could not be argued out of you, even on the days when you tried your hardest to argue it out, kept you in the process long enough for the process to do what it was designed to do. And what it was designed to do is what I want to show you now. There are 3 reasons why a soul with the specific depth and calling that you carry is brought through a wilderness season. And I want to name all 3 of them carefully, because together they are going to give you a completely different relationship with the season you just survived. The first reason is the removal of what was never actually you. There are things that accumulate around a person over the course of a life, things that are not bad in themselves, but that are not the core, not the essential thing, not the thing that the real assignment requires. Ways of understanding yourself that were handed to you by other people and that you adopted because they were familiar, not because they were true. An identity that was partly constructed by external validation, by what others expected of you, by what you believed you needed to be in order to be loved or accepted or considered worthy. That constructed identity is often comfortable. It fits, it functions, it gets through the day. But it is not all of who you are. And the wilderness is the place where the constructed parts get stripped, not cruelly, not as punishment, but with the same precision that a craftsman uses when he is removing everything that does not belong to the final form. What falls away in the wilderness was never the core. It was always the covering. And it had to fall away not because it was wrong, but because the person you are being moved toward cannot be carried by a version of yourself that is partly borrowed. The second reason is the acquisition of skills that are only available inside the exact environment where you found yourself. There are things you learned in this season that you could not have learned anywhere else. I am not talking about lessons in the abstract. I am talking about specific capacities that are only forged under specific pressures. Discernment, the ability to distinguish between what is true and what only sounds true, does not develop in comfort. It develops in the place where you are required to make decisions without clear guidance, and you discover, through the costly process of choosing and waiting, which internal signals were accurate and which were just noise. Real compassion, not the performed version, but the kind that comes from a person who has been inside the experience of what they are compassionate about, does not grow in ease. It grows in exactly the kind of season you were just in. The ability to hold peace in the middle of chaos, to remain grounded when the ground itself is shaking, cannot be studied into existence. It is built by being the person who has to hold peace in the middle of chaos, and discovering, again and again, that the peace was available even when it seemed impossible. You did not just survive the wilderness. You graduated from it with an education that no other environment could have provided. The third reason is the one I want to spend the most time on, because it is the one that connects most directly to what we are building toward in this message. Every assignment requires a carrier with the specific capacity to hold it. The weight of the assignment and the strength of the carrier have to be in proportion. You cannot give a demanding and delicate responsibility to someone who does not yet have the internal architecture to support it. Not because they are insufficient as a person, but because the match between the weight and the carrier matters for what gets delivered. The season you walked through was not random weight. It was calibrated weight. The specific combination of pressures you experienced, the specific types of endurance that were required, the specific quality of grace that was demanded from you over and over again in a season that showed no sign of ending, all of it was proportional to a specific assignment. An assignment that is either already present in your life or that is approaching it now. And the formation you received in this season was exactly the preparation the carrier needs to hold what is coming. You were not just being tested to see if you could pass. You were being prepared to carry something that required everything the test was building. Now, I want to take you to someone, because everything I have just said is real, and it is important, but there is a story that carries this truth at a depth that my explanation alone cannot reach. And I want to take you inside that story, not as a summary, but as an experience, because when you see it from the inside, something in you is going to recognize it as your own story, wearing a different face. His name is Joseph. Joseph was not born into difficulty. He was loved, deeply, particularly, and publicly loved by his father. He was given a coat that distinguished him from his brothers. He was given dreams, prophetic dreams, that showed him in a position of authority and honor. He was, from an early age, someone who had been marked, someone who carried something that other people could sense, even when they could not name it. And then it all collapsed. Not gradually, not with warning, with the sudden brutality of betrayal by the people who should have been his safest relationships. His brothers, the ones who knew him, the ones who had grown up beside him, looked at what he carried and decided it was a threat rather than a gift, and they threw him into a pit. I want you to stay in the pit for a moment. Because the pit is not just a physical location. The pit is the experience of having everything you understood about your life, about your relationships, about your future, suddenly removed from beneath you. It is the moment when the story you thought you were living turns out to be a different story entirely. And the question that lives in the pit is the most terrible question a soul can hold. Was the dream real, or did I misunderstand everything? Joseph did not know the answer to that question when he was in the pit. He could not have known it. All he had was the dream, and the dream was all he chose to hold on to. From the pit, he was sold to slave traders, and then to a household in Egypt. And here is where the story gets important, in a way I want you to notice very carefully. Joseph, in that household, was a slave. That is his title. That is his visible condition. A man who had been shown a palace in his dreams was now living as property in someone else's house. And he served with excellence. Not because someone was watching who could reward him for it. Not because the excellence was connected to any visible path toward his real assignment. Not because faithfulness in that household made any logical sense given who he was and what he had been shown about his future. He served with excellence because that is who he was, regardless of the container he was placed in. Joseph did not know that the faithfulness in that household was preparation. He did not know that the excellence without recognition was building something invisible but essential. He did not know that what he was practicing in a position far beneath his calling was the very discipline that would make him capable of operating at the height of his calling when it finally came. He just kept being faithful. And then another collapse, a false accusation. His integrity, the very thing he chose to protect at personal cost when he was offered an easy way out that would have compromised it, became the instrument of a second injustice. He was thrown into prison, not for what he did, for what he refused to do. This is the moment in Joseph's story that I want to remain in the longest, because this is the moment that most precisely mirrors what many of you experienced in your most recent hard season. This is the moment where the injustice is not just painful, it is specifically unfair in a way that makes the endurance uniquely costly. He had already survived the pit. He had already endured years of faithfulness without recognition. He had already held on to the dream when everything around him contradicted it. And now, having chosen to do the right thing at real personal cost, having protected his character when protecting it required sacrifice, he ended up in prison anyway. Anyone watching from the outside might have been excused for concluding that faithfulness does not protect you, that integrity does not reward you, that the calling is either not real or not worth what it costs. Joseph could have concluded that. Instead, he did something remarkable. In prison, he kept functioning. He did not sit in his despair and make it the center of his existence. He did not make his injustice the loudest thing in the room. He did not let what had been done to him become what he started doing to the people around him. He paid attention. He noticed what others were carrying. He asked about their dreams. He remained, even in prison, the version of himself that was oriented toward the purpose and the flourishing of others. And one day, someone walked out of prison and remembered him. And that memory became the mechanism by which the dream, the one he had been holding since before the pit, was finally fulfilled. Do you see what was happening? What happened in the pit was not punishment. What happened in that household was not a detour. What happened in prison was not a delay. Every stage was precision formation for a specific assignment, and the formation could not be accelerated because the assignment required someone who had been formed by exactly those pressures in exactly that sequence. Egypt needed a Joseph who had survived betrayal, practiced faithfulness without recognition, and maintained his character under wrongful imprisonment. It needed someone who could manage abundance without being destroyed by it, because he had already survived desolation without being destroyed by that. The palace required someone that the pit had made. And I want to go to the original language for a moment, because there is something in the ancient text that I do not want to pass by. There is a Hebrew word that appears again and again in the stories of people who walked through exactly this kind of formation season. The word is kazak, and most of the time when we read our translations, we see it rendered as be strong and courageous. And that sounds simple. It sounds like an instruction to feel a certain way, to gather more willpower, to push through, but that is not what the word means. Chazak, in the original Hebrew, comes from a root that means to grip, to seize something from within yourself, to take hold of a truth with your interior hands and refuse to release it even while the external circumstances are making a very persuasive case that you should let go. Chazak is not about feeling strong. Chazak is about gripping what is true when everything external is trying to shake it loose. And that is what you did. In your own pit, in your own season of faithfulness without recognition, in your own version of an imprisonment that was not your fault, you gripped. You did not let go of what was true about who you are and what you were made for, even when the evidence of your circumstances was making a very loud argument that you had misunderstood everything. That grip, that specific interior act of holding on when letting go, would have been understandable. That is what Chazak describes, and it is what was being recorded. Now I want to come to the third part of what was happening in your season, and this one requires the most gentleness, because it involves a kind of loss that had real emotional cost and that deserves to be named honestly. In the process of the formation you went through, things fell away. Relationships, certain ways of understanding yourself, ways of moving through the world that used to feel stable, parts of an identity that you had been carrying for a long time. And it is possible, even probable, that some of that loss felt like failure, like evidence of something going wrong, like you were losing yourself rather than finding yourself. I want to speak directly to that. What fell away was not your identity. It was the layers that had been placed on top of your identity over years of living in an environment that did not fully know who you really were. Some of what fell away was the approval seeking, the version of you that needed external validation before you could move forward, the part that checked what others thought before trusting what you knew. That part fell away in this season, not because you stopped caring about people, but because the circumstances removed the scaffolding of external validation, and in the absence of it, you discovered that you could still move. You still knew what was true. The approval was not as load-bearing as you had believed it was. Some of what fell away was the performance-based worth, the equation that said your value was determined by what you produced, by how well you executed, by whether the outcomes matched the standards. In a season where outcomes were not within your control, where executing well did not guarantee anything, that equation broke. And in the breaking of it, you were freed from a dependency that had been costing you more than you knew. Some of what fell away was the need for certainty before movement, the version of you that required a clear and complete picture before being willing to take a step. That fell away because the season gave you no complete picture and still required you to step. And in stepping without clarity, you discovered something that safety never could have taught you, that you have the capacity to navigate by something other than certainty. And what remained when all of that fell away? That is the most important question of this entire section. What remained is you, the version of you that was there before all the conditioning, before the approval seeking, before the performance equation, before the need for certainty as a prerequisite for action. The version of you that simply is, without needing to earn the right to be. And when God looked at that version of you, the stripped back, essential, unperformable version of you that the wilderness had brought to the surface, when he evaluated what was there in its purest form, something happened that I have been building this entire section to bring you to. Here is the first major truth. The formation you experienced in this season was not incidental. It was intentional. Not incidental, like something that happened by accident and was later turned to good. Intentional, like something that was designed from the beginning to produce exactly what it produced, in exactly the soul it was given to. And what it formed in you, the specific qualities, the specific capacity, the specific graces that developed under pressure, the chazak, the grip on truth you maintained when nothing external confirmed it, the faithfulness that continued without feedback, the love maintained at personal cost, the character held intact when compromise would have been excusable. All of that was exactly what created the foundation for what I am going to tell you in the sections that follow. But here is where it gets deeper, because what was built in you was not only for you. It was not just formation for your own private journey. What was built in you is the foundation for a comparison I have not yet made. A comparison between what you are capable of and what even the most extraordinary created beings in all of existence are capable of. And when I make that comparison for you, the word that God spoke about you when he turned to the angels and drew their attention to what you had done is going to arrive with a weight that I cannot rush us to yet. But before I take you to the angels, there is one more piece of the foundation that I need to lay, one that will answer a question that I suspect has been sitting in you, perhaps quietly, perhaps loudly, for longer than this season alone. The question is, why me? Why was this specific weight given to this specific soul? Why not someone else? That is where we are going next. Because the answer to that question is the answer that will change the way you see yourself for the rest of your life. The question is, why you? And I need you to understand something about the way I am going to answer that. I am not using it as a rhetorical setup for a simple motivational phrase. I am asking it genuinely, and I am going to answer it with real precision, because you deserve a real answer. Not a general encouragement that could apply to anyone who has ever been through anything hard. A specific answer to the specific question of why this particular weight was assigned to this particular soul. So, let me begin here. Not every person receives this specific kind of trial. I want to be careful how I say that, because I am not creating a hierarchy of suffering. I am not saying that some people suffer more than others, and that somehow makes them more important or more loved. That is not what I mean. What I mean is this. There is a specific quality of trial, a specific configuration of pressures that contains within it a particular kind of formation potential. A formation that does not just refine what is already present, but builds what was not yet there. That constructs new chambers of capacity in a soul that is being prepared for an assignment that will require chambers that refinement alone cannot create. Most trials refine. And refining is valuable. It burns off impurity, it clarifies, it improves. But the trial you were given did something different. Your trial did not just refine you, it built you. And the building happened towards something specific, which means you were selected for this not randomly, not because difficulty simply finds you wherever you are, but because of something that was already in you, something that God recognized as the foundation on which what this trial would build could actually stand. The weight of the load is always proportional to the strength of the carrier. And the fact that you were given this specific weight is itself a declaration about what God already knew was inside you. Now I want to take you to another story, not as an illustration that hangs loosely on the side of what I am saying, but as the truth that carries it, because I think when you see this story from the inside, you are going to recognize something in it that belongs to you. His name is David, and his story begins with a moment that is well known, but that I do not think most people look at carefully enough. A man named Samuel was sent to find the next king. He went to a specific family, and he looked at the sons. He looked at them one by one. He looked at the strong ones, and the tall ones, and the ones that his own eyes said yes to. And with each one, the answer was no, not this one, not this one, until all the sons who were present had stood before him, and the answer had been no to every one of them. And Samuel asked, "Are these all of your sons?" And the father said, "There is one more, the youngest. He is out in the field. He is with the sheep. Go get him." That is David, the last one called, the one in the field, the one who was not even included in the gathering, until a question was asked that forced the issue. Samuel looked at David, and the word came, "This is the one." And he was anointed, right there, in the presence of his brothers, with oil poured over him and a divine declaration spoken over his life. The weight of an assignment was placed on a young man who was still covered in the dust and the smell of the field. And then David went back to the field. No palace, no crown, no visible change in his circumstances, no announcement made to the people around him. He returned to the sheep, and the sheep did not know that the person tending them had just been declared king, and the field did not look different, and the daily work was the same daily work it had always been. And in that gap, the stretch of years between the anointing and the palace, between the declaration and the visible fulfillment of it, something happened in David that could not have happened anywhere else. He encountered a lion. Alone, in the field, with no audience, no one to witness the moment, no one to write down what happened or report on the outcome. A lion came for the flock he was responsible for, and David did not run. He did not calculate the odds and decide it was not his problem. He did not wait for someone with more authority to handle the situation. He went after the lion, and he killed it. And then a bear came, and he killed that too. And no one saw it. No testimony was recorded at the time. No story was told at the city gate. No recognition was given to the young shepherd who had just done something that most soldiers would have been afraid to do. David killed a lion and a bear, alone, in a field, with no witnesses except the sheep and the God who was watching. And then he went back to work. And years later, when a giant stood in the valley and made declarations that caused trained soldiers to step back, David stood and said something that I want you to hear very carefully. He did not say, "I am anointed, therefore I am not afraid." He did not reach for the declaration that had been spoken over him as his source of courage. He reached for something else. He reached for the specific memory of specific private faithfulness. He said, "I have done this before, not here, not publicly, not in a way that anyone who is looking at me right now knows about, but in a field, alone. The lion came and the bear came, and neither of them could take what was in my care. And this giant will be no different." David did not practice fighting lions and bears so that one day he could defeat a giant. He fought lions and bears because he was a shepherd, and the flock needed protecting. But in fighting them, in that private and unwitnessed faithfulness, he was building something he did not know he was building until the day it was required of him in public. Your private season was your field. The faithfulness you maintained when there was no gallery, when there was no one watching who could reward you for it, when the work was invisible, and the outcome was uncertain, and the cost was real, was not wasted. It was the construction of the very capacity that the next season of your life is going to require. You did not know you were building it, but it was being built. And what was built is the beginning of the answer to the question of why this specific trial was given to you. Now let me be very precise about something, because I think how you hold this matters enormously for how you receive what is coming. When God assigns a specific trial to a specific soul, it is not cruelty. I want to say that again, because some of you need to hear it more than once before it can settle. When God assigns a specific trial to a specific soul, it is not cruelty, it is not indifference. It is not you being selected for punishment, or being made an example of, or being treated as expendable in a larger plan that does not take your suffering seriously. It is the highest form of trust. Think about the way a skilled craftsman approaches the most delicate work. When the work is intricate, when the material is rare, when the outcome matters in a way that cannot be recovered from if it goes wrong, the craftsman does not hand that work to the least developed hands in the room. He does not give the most demanding task to someone who has not been built for it. He gives the most delicate and most important work to the hands that have been specifically prepared to hold it correctly. You were given the most demanding version of this formation because you were the most capable of completing it, not in an abstract ranking, capable in the specific ways that this specific formation required. And here is what the specificity of your trial reveals. Not one thing, three things. The first is that God already knew your capacity exceeds the container you are currently in. He already knew, before the trial began, that who you are is larger than where you are. And the trial is one of the mechanisms by which you are being moved from a container that cannot hold all of who you are to an assignment that actually fits. The second is that God already knew what you would do under pressure when no one was watching. He already knew, and he sent the pressure anyway. Not to discover the answer, he already had it, but to give you the experience of finding out for yourself, to give you the unshakable memory of your own faithfulness, unwitnessed and uncelebrated, so that you could draw on it when you needed to believe in yourself, and the external evidence was not offering any support. And the third is that God already knew the specific grace that would be released through your specific suffering. There is something in you, something that was unlocked in this season, that is the direct product of exactly what you experienced and exactly how you moved through it. Not a general grace that anyone who suffers acquires. A specific one, the kind that only comes from someone who has been inside this particular experience and moved through it without losing their essential character. And that specific grace is the thing that is needed somewhere you are being moved toward. Now, let me answer the question with full precision. Why you specifically? What is it about you, specifically, that made you the soul that was trusted with this specific weight? You were not chosen for this, despite the things that set you apart from most people. You were chosen because of them. You were not chosen for this, despite your depth. You were chosen because of it. Only someone capable of going deep can be formed by deep pressure. Shallow soil cannot hold a deep root. And what was being formed in you required roots that go further down than most formation processes reach. You were not chosen for this despite your sensitivity. You were chosen because of it. Sensitivity is not a vulnerability in a soul like yours. It is a calibration instrument. It is what allows you to receive at a frequency that less sensitive souls do not have access to. And the assignment that is ahead of you requires the ability to receive precisely. You were not chosen for this despite your capacity to love. You were chosen because of it. Only someone who can love at depth experiences the full cost of maintaining love in a season where the love is not returned. And only someone who has experienced that full cost and chosen to love again carries the credential of someone who can genuinely heal others. You can give general comfort for a wound you have never had, but you cannot give the specific medicine that only comes from someone who has been inside the wound and emerged from it carrying something real. You were not chosen for this. Despite your commitment to truth, you were chosen because of it. The inability to take shortcuts, the refusal to perform your way through when performing would have been so much easier. The insistence on actually becoming rather than simply appearing to become. That commitment is what made the formation real rather than cosmetic. Only a real transformation would do. And a real transformation required a real process. And there is a fifth reason, one that extends further than your own story. You carry something that is not only about you. There are patterns, ways of moving through the world, ways of believing and enduring and loving and relating that were handed to you before you were aware enough to examine them. Patterns that were running in your life long before you had the language to name them. And in this season, in the process of everything that fell away and everything that was built, something happened to those patterns. They changed in you, which means they change after you. The people who will know you from this point forward, whether by birth or by relationship or by the reach of what you carry, will encounter a different set of patterns than the ones that were handed to you. Not because you performed a different set of habits, because you went through a formation that reached all the way down to where those patterns live and changed them at the level where change actually holds. You were not just being formed for your own journey. You were being formed for the journey of everyone who will walk in the wake of who you are becoming. Let me give you the full statement of what we have been building in this section. You were not randomly placed in this trial. You were not caught in a storm that happened to be passing through your area. You were not collateral damage in a plan that did not account for you. You were specifically trusted with this specific weight because of what God already knew was specifically inside you. The trial was not bigger than you. It was sized for you. And being sized for you means it was also, at every stage, a declaration. A declaration about the assessment God had already made of your capacity, your depth, your ability to love under cost, your sensitivity, your commitment to truth, and your generational significance. You were the only carrier this particular assignment required. That is not an accident. That is not a coincidence. That is not randomness arriving at a fortunate result. That is appointment. And now that we have established what the formation was, and now that I have shown you why you were the soul entrusted with it, we are ready to move to the most significant piece of what this message is carrying. Because everything we have covered in these 3 sections, the quality of what you carried, the formation it produced, the specificity of why you were chosen to carry it, all of it was preparation for a comparison I have not yet made. A comparison between what you did and what the most extraordinary created beings in all of existence are capable of doing. I need to tell you something about angels, not as a theological aside, not as an interesting detour, but because the truth about what angels are, and specifically about what they are not able to do, is the only framework through which you will fully comprehend what God was seeing when he turned to those very angels and said something about you that brought the room to silence. Let me show you what I mean. There are things we think we understand about angels until we actually look at them carefully. And I do not mean look at the paintings. I do not mean the cultural images that have accumulated over centuries, the wings and the soft light, and the generic sense of something beautiful and distant. I mean go to the oldest accounts, the ones that describe what these beings actually are, in specific terms, with enough detail to paint a picture that is far more extraordinary and far more precise than anything our cultural imagination has constructed around them. Because what I am about to show you about their nature is not a theological detour. It is the foundation. It is the one thing that makes what God said about you in your hardest season carry the full weight that it deserves. And without this foundation, what I am about to tell you will sound like encouragement. What it actually is something much larger than that. So, let me show you what an angel actually is. An angel is a being of constant proximity, not visiting proximity, not seasonal nearness, not the kind of closeness that comes and goes depending on circumstance. Constant, unbroken. The ancient records describe 4 living creatures that do not rest day or night. They describe seraphim who stand above the throne. They describe messengers who move with such immediacy between the divine word and the divine act that the gap between the instruction and the execution is nearly invisible. These are not passive observers. These are not decorative elements of a spiritual backdrop. These are active, intelligent, powerful beings who exist in permanent alignment with the source of all things and who live at every moment inside the fullness of its presence. And because of that permanent proximity, because of that unbroken dwelling in the light of what is most true about reality, certain things about the experience of an angel are fundamentally and entirely different from yours. The most important of those things is this: an angel does not have to choose to believe. Let me explain what I mean by that, because I think it is easy to hear it and miss the weight of it. Faith, for a human being, is not a feeling. It is a decision made in the absence of complete information. It is the act of leaning your weight on something you cannot fully prove, of moving in a direction that the visible evidence has not yet confirmed, of saying yes to a reality that is not yet fully present in the world you can see, and that act, that specific decision to trust what you cannot see more than what you can, is the defining act of a human spiritual life. It is what every hard season ultimately asks of you. It is what every wilderness ultimately comes down to. An angel does not make that decision, not because angels are incapable of devotion or loyalty or love, but because the thing that faith reaches toward, angels are already living inside of it. They are not reaching toward the light. They are in the room where the light is always on, always present, always fully visible. You believe in a fire you cannot see from where you are standing. An angel lives in the fire, and you cannot choose to believe in something you are already inside of. The choice is only available to the one who is on the other side of the veil. An angel does not have to hold on to trust, while everything visible argues against it. The human experience of looking at your circumstances and finding in them a persuasive case against the goodness of the one who made you, that experience is specific to beings who see reality partially. You are inside your story. You cannot see the ending. You cannot see the full architecture of what is being constructed around and through and underneath what you are living in. And in the absence of that full picture, what you can see has enormous power over what you believe is happening. When circumstances appear to contradict the care of the divine, that contradiction feels real, because your view of the situation is incomplete. An angel does not operate from an incomplete view. An angel's perception of a situation already includes what you do not have access to: the purpose, the scope, the arc, the resolution. Which means the visible evidence that threatens your trust does not have the same leverage over a being whose vision of that evidence includes the whole picture. Wavering is a response to incomplete information. Angels live in the completion. You lived in the incomplete, and you held. Now, with that foundation in place, let me go to the specific. Let me name the 7 things that angels by the very design of what they are and where they live, have never been called to do. And as I name them, I want you to let them land, not as a list, as a mirror, because each one of these 7 things is going to describe something you actually did in your actual season. The first is this: an angel has never chosen faith in the genuine dark, not the dark where the light is temporarily obscured. The dark where the evidence is actively pointing the other direction, where there is no confirming signal, where choosing to believe requires you to choose something you cannot defend to a reasonable and well-meaning observer. That specific choice, made from that specific place, is not in the angelic experience. It is in yours, and you made it, more than once, on days when making it cost more than you had available to spend. The second, an angel has never maintained trust while carrying the specific feeling that they had been forgotten by the one they had given their faithfulness to. The psychological experience of faithfulness, unrewarded, of calling out and hearing nothing in return, of continuing to orient toward a presence that is not currently confirming itself in your experience, while continuing to trust that the absence of confirmation is not the same as absence. That is a weight that no angel has ever been required to carry. You carried it. In the middle of that silence, you carried it. The third, an angel has never loved someone who wounded them and then chosen to love them again. The full experience of receiving a wound from the very relationship you opened yourself to, the particular cost of vulnerability that was received and then misused, the choice after that injury to remain open, to continue extending what was taken advantage of before, that is a uniquely human form of love. Angels have witnessed it. They have watched human beings make that choice across centuries of human history. But it is not a choice they have been required to make themselves. You were required, and you made it. The fourth, an angel has never endured without knowing when the endurance would end. There is a specific category of stamina that only a being without full access to divine timing can produce. It is the stamina of someone who gets up on a Monday, not knowing if this Monday is closer to the end of the hard season or further from it, who keeps going on a Tuesday with no new information, who builds a rhythm of faithfulness with no visible finish line in view. Angels move with the full knowledge of the divine timeline. They do not pace themselves for a race with an unknown length. They always know where the road leads. You did not know, and you kept going anyway. The fifth, an angel has never extended grace toward someone who was not going to receive it. There is a specific kind of costly generosity that belongs to the act of offering something good to someone who will use that offering as evidence that you are weak enough to exploit. The natural and reasonable response to that experience is to stop offering, to protect yourself, to close the door that keeps getting used to let in damage. Choosing not to close it, continuing to extend grace towards someone who is treating that grace as a vulnerability, takes a form of courage and love that simply does not appear anywhere in the description of angelic experience. It appears in your description. It appears in this specific season. The sixth, an angel has never sustained hope without evidence long enough that hope itself became a source of exhaustion. There is a suffering that belongs uniquely to people who believe. It is not the suffering of despair. It is the suffering of maintained hope in a prolonged season that is not yet resolving. Every day, the hope has to be chosen again. Every morning, it has to be picked up again before the day has given it any new reason to exist. And the choosing, done again and again over an extended season, accumulates into its own particular weariness. Angels live in the fulfillment of what you are still believing for. They do not carry the weight of sustained hope without evidence. You carried it for longer than it was comfortable to carry. And the seventh. I want to spend time on this one, because I think it is the one that most precisely names what was most costly about your season. An angel has never been required to keep becoming in the dark, not knowing if the becoming would ever be witnessed. What you did in the season we have been talking about was not simply survive. It was not simply hold on until things improved. You were being changed inside the suffering. Something was forming in you that was not there before. Capacities were being built. Depths of character were taking shape, and you did that becoming without any external signal that it was happening, without anyone pulling you aside and saying, "What is being built in you right now is extraordinary," without a mirror that showed you who you were turning into, without the feedback that normally makes growth feel real and valid and worth continuing. You became in the dark, and the becoming was real, even though it was unseen. That is not something that can be said about the most powerful created beings in the universe. It is something that can only be said about a being who operates from faith rather than sight, who builds in the dark, who trusts the process without being able to see the process clearly, who keeps choosing to be the person they are being called to be, even in the absence of confirmation that the calling is real. 7 capacities, all 7 simultaneously, over an entire hard season, at real cost, without an audience. I need to take you to someone who understood this from the inside, a man whose story carries the specific weight of everything I have just named, in a way that I think is going to make what God said about you land at a depth that only a real parallel can reach. His name is Job. And before I tell you what Job went through, I need to tell you about what happened before it. Because there is a scene at the very opening of his story that most people skim past in their haste to get to the disaster. And that scene is in many ways the most important part of the whole account. There was a gathering, a council, and in that gathering, a specific question was raised about a specific man. The question was not about Job's capacity, not about his intelligence or his resources or his social position. The question was about the nature of his faithfulness. And specifically, the question was this: is his faithfulness real? Is he faithful because of who he is, or is he faithful because of what the faithfulness is buying him? Take away the protection. Take away the prosperity. Take away everything external that is surrounding his faithfulness and confirming it and making it comfortable to maintain. Strip all of that away and see what is underneath. This is the question that exists under every wilderness season for every soul who carries a real calling. Not, are you talented? Not, are you capable? Not, are you smart enough, or strong enough, or connected enough? Is your faithfulness real when there is nothing confirming it from the outside? And what Job went through is the universe's answer to that question. It was not slow, it was comprehensive, and it was rapid. His wealth vanished. His children were taken from him in a single day. His health deteriorated to the point where his body became a source of constant suffering. The scaffolding of external confirmation that had surrounded his faithfulness was removed in almost every direction at once. And what was left was a man sitting in what remained, not running, not hiding, not performing a piece he did not feel, but sitting in the honest reality of what had happened to him. And then his friends came. And his friends did the thing that is, I believe, the most damaging thing that can be done to someone in the middle of genuine wilderness. They explained it. They took something they did not fully understand, and they offered a framework that made it make sense within the world as they understood it. Job must have done something to deserve this. Suffering like this does not arrive without cause. There is an explanation that fits this into a system of reward and punishment, and if we can find the cause, We can also identify what Job needs to do to end the suffering. And Job, in one of the most remarkable responses in any ancient record, said no. Not out of defiance, not out of arrogance. He said no because what his friends were offering required him to accept something false about himself in order to make the suffering fit their narrative. And he would not do it. He would not paste a false explanation over a true experience just to make the people around him more comfortable with what they were witnessing. He sat in the truth of what was happening, and he refused to let it produce a lie. And then, in the middle of all of it, in the middle of the pain that had no explanation he could accept, and the silence that had stretched beyond what felt endurable, and the confusion that came from not being able to make his experience fit any framework he had previously used. To understand his life, he said something. I know that my Redeemer lives. Let me stay with that for a moment. Because those words were not spoken from a place of certainty in the external sense, Job could not see his Redeemer acting. He could not point to visible evidence of an active Redeemer. He could not feel the presence of his Redeemer in any experiential way that would have satisfied an outside observer's request for proof. The circumstances were not providing any of that. He knew from somewhere else, from the grip, from the chazak, from the interior place, that holds what is true not because the evidence is confirming it, but because something deeper than evidence has taken hold of it and will not release. That is the seventh capacity I named, the becoming in the dark, the knowing in the unknowing, the grip that persists when every external signal is saying that releasing it would be the reasonable thing to do. And God's response to Job is where this message has been heading all along. Because after the trial, after the silence, after Job sat in the truth of his experience and refused to dress it in a false explanation, and refused to release the grip, and refused to let the pressure change who he fundamentally was, God spoke. And what God said to Job's friends is what I want you to hear through the lens of your own season. He said, "You have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has." Not Job was perfect. Not Job responded correctly to everything. Not Job performed faithfulness in a way that checked all the boxes. He said, "My servant Job spoke what was true." Even in the middle of the confusion, even in the middle of the arguing, even when his language was raw and his pain was unfiltered, and his questions were the kind that made his religious friends uncomfortable, Job spoke truth, and that truth, maintained under that pressure, moved God. And here is what I hear the Spirit placing on my heart for you in this moment. I want to offer this carefully and with the reverence it deserves. These are words I believe are being carried in this message for the specific person this message is for. I hear the Father saying, "What you have walked through in this season, I watched every moment of it. And what I watched was the same thing I watched in Job. Not a performance of faithfulness, not a curated version of trust. The real thing. The grip. The choosing to know in the middle of not knowing. The refusing to let the pressure produce a lie about who you are or what I am. My angels witnessed what you did, and they had no category for it, just as they had no category for what Job did. Because what you both did is outside the range of what I have ever asked of them. And I want you to know what I said to the friends of Job, what I felt about the faithfulness of Job in the midst of everything that surrounded it. That is what I feel about what you did in your season. You spoke truth when truth was the most expensive thing you could have offered, and I was moved by it. Hold that. Not just for a moment. Let it reach the part of you that has been carrying the weight of a season that no one fully saw. Now let me bring this section to its full delivery. What you did in your hardest season required a capacity that angels were never given. not a lesser capacity, not a deficient one, a different and specific one, the one that belongs only to a being who operates from faith rather than sight, who chooses from within limitation, who grips what is true from the inside when the outside is making a very loud argument that letting go would be the rational thing. All 7 expressions of that capacity, simultaneously, in a single season, at real and significant personal cost, without an audience, without feedback, without confirmation that what you were doing was being seen. An angel has never done that. Not because angels are less than you, but because that specific act of choosing was never in their assignment. It was in yours. And when God looked at all 7 of those things happening at the same time, in the same soul, in the same season, something happened in the room where the angels were standing. Something that has been sitting in this message since the first word of it, waiting to be fully named. He said something. And we have now built the complete foundation that makes it possible for you to receive what he said at the weight it actually carries. We are ready. We have arrived. What God said, and what it means for everything about who you are, and what is ahead of you, is what I am going to give you in the section that follows. Stay with me, because we are about to enter the place this message has been carrying you toward since the beginning. We have arrived. I do not want to rush this. I have been building toward what I am about to say for everything that has come before it. And I think the right thing to do at this point, before I give you the full revelation, is to stay here for a moment and let the weight of where we are actually land, because we have covered a lot of ground, and I do not want what we have built to pass through you without being received. Take a breath, not a dramatic one, just a real one, the kind that actually reaches the deeper part of your lungs and carries with it the intention to receive something rather than just process something. Here is what I need you to understand about the 3 things I showed you before we arrive at the center of this message. The first was about the season, what it was, what it asked of you, what it produced in you, the wilderness that was not punishment, but formation, the specific and intentional process that built in you something that could not have been built any other way. You stayed in it long enough for the formation to complete, and what was completed was something that required the entire process to become real. The second was about you. Why you? Why this specific weight was given to this specific soul, not by accident, not because difficulty simply finds the faithful, but because God already knew what was in you, already knew that you were the carrier that this particular formation required, already knew that what needed to be built in you was going to be needed somewhere ahead of you, and entrusted you with the specific weight that only the soul he knew you to be could carry with the quality of faithfulness that this assignment demanded. The third was about the 7 things, the 7 specific capacities that belong exclusively to a being who operates from faith rather than sight, every one of which you produced, every one of which angels, the most extraordinary created beings in existence, were simply never given the capacity to demonstrate, because what they are and where they live means those specific choices were never in their assignment. They were in yours. Now, here is what all 3 of those things, taken together, are pointing toward. You exercised the rarest capacity in all of creation. I want to say that slowly enough for it to land. You exercised the rarest capacity in all of creation, not the most powerful, not the most visible, not the one that makes the most noise or commands the most attention, the rarest, the one that exists only in a being who is not yet inside the fullness of what they believe for, and who chooses, from within that limitation, to live as if they already are, to love as if the love will land well, to hold on as if the holding is not in vain, To keep becoming as if the becoming matters, even when no one is watching it happen. That is what faith is, at its truest and deepest level. And that is what you produced. What the wilderness formed in you was not just endurance. It was not just character. What the wilderness formed in you was the proven and tested expression of the rarest kind of trust in the universe. And when God looked at the full scope of what was there, when he evaluated not just what you endured, but how you endured it, not just that you held on, but what holding on looked like from the inside, where it was genuinely costing you something, something happened in the presence of his angels. He was amazed. I want to go to a specific word now, because I think when I show you what this word actually means, the title of this message is going to shift from something that sounded like an encouragement to something that functions as a genuine revelation. The word is taumazo. It comes from the ancient Greek, and it is the word that is used in the gospel accounts at the moments when Jesus, standing in a human body, in a human context, encountering human circumstances, experienced something that the text describes as marveling, being genuinely astonished, having a response that goes beyond the usual register of evaluated and unsurprised divine awareness into something that the text is reaching for a specific word to describe. Thaumazo, to marvel, to be genuinely struck by what you are witnessing, not the general awareness of an omniscient being observing all things with equal calm, but the specific, focused, personally responsive experience of witnessing something that produces what can only be described as astonishment. There are only two moments in the gospel accounts where this specific word is used to describe Jesus' response to a human being. Two moments, across all the encounters, across all the healings and conversations and confrontations and questions and miraculous signs and all the complexity of what it means for the divine to walk in close proximity to the full range of human experience. The word thaumazo is applied to Jesus himself in response to a person in only two places. In one of those places, it is the response to a centurion who demonstrated a quality of faith that the text says Jesus had not encountered, even among those who had the longest history of knowing God. And the thaumazo, in that moment, was not a response to something the centurion had done. It was a response to the quality of what the centurion believed, in the specific way he believed it, from the specific place he believed it from. The same word, applied to God's response to you in this season. Not general divine awareness of your existence, not the standard omniscient noting of your circumstances, the specific, personally responsive, genuinely astonished recognition of a quality of faithfulness demonstrated from a place and under conditions that produced in God the response that only that word can describe. He was shockingly amazed. And I want to show you the three specific dimensions of what God was amazed by, because I think when I lay them out, you are going to recognize each one of them as a real and specific thing about how you moved through your season, not a generalization. The specific truth about the specific quality of the specific endurance you produced. The first dimension is what you chose to do. Not just that you endured, not just that you survived, but the specific nature of the choices you made under the pressure of the season. You chose faithfulness when unfaithfulness would have been understandable. You chose love when love was the most expensive available option. You chose to hold what was true about God and about yourself when the circumstances were providing a very persuasive case for a different conclusion. You chose, again and again, the harder and more costly thing, not because you were performing virtue for an audience, but because you were genuinely oriented toward what was right and true. The what of what you chose in this season is itself remarkable, but it is only the first dimension. The second dimension is how you chose to do it. God was not only watching what you did, he was watching the quality of it, the specific texture and tone and character of how you moved through the season, whether the endurance was brittle or supple, whether the faithfulness was tense and straining or grounded and real, whether the love was performed and costly in a way that built up resentment underneath it, or genuine and costly in a way that remained clean, whether the grace was mechanical or alive, whether the holding on was desperate or settled. These are the things that are only visible from the inside. From the outside, endurance looks like endurance, but from the inside, God could see the quality of it. And what he saw was extraordinary, not just the choosing, the quality of the choosing. And the third dimension is who the choosing revealed you to be. This is the one I want to spend the most time on, because I think this is the dimension that carries the most significance for where you are going from here. When everything external was stripped away, when the scaffolding of comfort and confirmation and reward was no longer present, when you were left with nothing but your own essential self and the weight of a season that was asking more of you than you felt you had to give, what was revealed underneath all of it was the real version of you, not the constructed version, not the version shaped by what others expected or what circumstances encouraged. The version that was there before any of that. The version that the formation process was, at every stage, working to bring to the surface. And when God looked at that version of you, the unguarded, unperformable, genuine version of who you are at your deepest, he was amazed. Not because it was perfect, not because it was without struggle or confusion or moments where it bent toward breaking, but because of what it chose in the bending, because of the quality of the choice made by a soul that was genuinely under maximum pressure and yet produced something that has no parallel in the angelic realm. And now, I want to give you what I have been building this entire message to deliver, because there is something God said, something he turned to the angels and spoke, something that this message has been carrying since its very first word. And I want to offer what I believe the Spirit has placed on my heart to say about it, with the reverence and care that it deserves. I believe these are the words that were carried for you into this message. I hear the Father saying, "My child, I want you to understand something about what I saw when I watched you in your hardest season. I have observed 10,000 seasons of human faithfulness. I have watched souls across centuries choose what was right when what was right was the harder thing, and I have been moved by many of them. But what I watched in you in this specific season, the specific combination of what you chose and how you chose it, and who the choosing revealed you to be, it was not ordinary. It was not standard. I want to be very precise about what I am saying. I was amazed by you, not because you were perfect, because you were real, because when the pressure reached its highest point and everything that surrounded your faithfulness was stripped away, what was underneath was something that stopped me in a way that drew the attention of every being in the room. I turned to the angels beside me and I said, "Look at what they are doing. Look at how they are carrying this." And they looked, and they had no category for it. Because it is not, in their experience, what you produced in that season, what it cost you to produce it, what it revealed about who you are. I want you to know that I saw every moment of it, every moment, and I was not just watching from a distance. I was in the middle of it with you. And what I saw, from inside your experience rather than outside of it, left me with only one response. I was shockingly, profoundly, personally amazed by you. And I have been waiting for this moment to make sure that you knew it. Let that settle. Not as a performance of receiving something, not the version of receiving that immediately starts to analyze whether you deserve it. Just let it settle into the place in you that has been carrying the season without knowing that heaven was watching it the way heaven was watching it. Because what was just spoken over you is not encouragement. It is a report. It is an account of something that actually happened. In the unseen room, when God turned to the beings who have never been required to do what you just did and drew their attention to you. Now I want to come to something that makes this complete, because I have given you the declaration, and I want to give you the image that holds it. The picture that has been woven through this message from the beginning, and that I want to now bring to its full expression. There is a substance that is not particularly impressive in its original form. When you hold it, it is dark and dense and gives no visible indication of what it is capable of becoming. Coal, formed from organic matter under pressure, dark and heavy and not the kind of thing that calls attention to itself. Nothing about its appearance announces what is inside it. And then pressure arrives. Sustained, significant, structural pressure, not the kind that damages, the kind that transforms, compressing what is there into something so dense, so reorganized at the molecular level, so fundamentally changed in its internal structure, that the same material that came in as something ordinary becomes something extraordinary, a diamond. The hardest natural substance on Earth. The material that refracts light in the specific way that makes it look like it is holding light rather than simply reflecting it. The thing that endures every pressure because it was built by pressure, not weakened by what formed it, perfected by it. That is you, not the coal that survived the pressure, the diamond that the pressure was always designed to produce. And a diamond does not know what it is becoming while the pressure is forming it. It does not receive updates on its progress. It does not see its own facets emerging in real time. It undergoes the process in the dark, in the deep, with no mirror, and it emerges what it was always going to be if the process was allowed to complete. You let the process complete, and what emerged is not the same material that went in. Same soul, entirely different capacity, same heart, entirely different depth, same person, entirely different version. And when God looks at what you are now, compared to who you were before the pressure arrived, he does not see someone who survived something. He sees someone who was transformed by something, someone who came out of the formation, not diminished, but elevated, not broken, but built, not crushed, but crystallized into the most structurally stable, most light-holding, most extraordinary version of the material that was always there. That is the full revelation. The season was not random, it was intentional. The wait was not punishment, it was calibration. The formation was not incidental, it was precision. What you produced in it was not ordinary. It was the rarest thing in all of creation. And God was not simply aware of it, he was amazed by it. Shockingly, profoundly, personally. And I want to tell you something before we move forward. Because there is something specific I am going to share with you in the next section of this message that I do not want you to receive without this context. What I am about to show you connects to everything we have just covered. It connects the spiritual truth of what you just received with something that science has been discovering about the actual frequency that this kind of faithfulness operates on. Something about what happens in the brain of a person who has been through exactly what you have been through. And something about what is available to you now that you are standing on the other side of the formation season. This is not a departure from everything we just talked about. It is the extension of it into the practical. Stay with me, because what I am about to share is going to give you a completely different relationship with the capacity that made heaven stop. There is something that researchers in neuroscience have been studying for decades that most people never hear about, not because the research is obscure, but because the implications of it, what it actually means about who we are and how we are designed to function at our highest level, have not made their way from the laboratory into the conversation that most people are having about their spiritual and personal lives. And I want to bring it into that conversation now, because I think when I show you what this research has found, and when I connect it to everything we have just covered in this message, something is going to click into place for you that has been sitting just outside your full understanding of your own experience. The human brain produces something called brainwaves, electrical patterns of activity that correspond to different states of consciousness, different ways of processing information, different levels of access to our own capacities. And researchers have identified several distinct categories of these waves. Theta waves, which appear in deep relaxation and light sleep. Alpha waves, which are present in calm, quiet wakefulness. Beta waves, which dominate during normal active thinking and problem solving. And at the very top of that spectrum, in a category that, until recently, most researchers assumed was rarely, if ever, accessible to ordinary human beings in ordinary human circumstances, there are gamma waves. Gamma waves operate at 40 cycles per second and above. And what the research has found about gamma is remarkable. It is the state of the brain during peak perception, during the moments where different areas of the brain that do not normally communicate with each other begin to fire in synchrony, creating a kind of integrated awareness that allows for pattern recognition at a level far beyond what normal waking consciousness can produce. The MIT studies on this, the Harvard research, the work coming out of neuroscience labs at Stanford and Princeton, they all point toward the same finding. Gamma is not the normal state. It is the elevated state. It is the state that corresponds to what mystics across centuries have called divine encounter. What athletes call being in the zone. What artists call the flow that carries the work beyond what they could have planned. And here is what makes this especially significant. Children naturally operate in gamma. When a child is young, before the formal educational system shapes how they process information, and before the weight of adult life begins to compress their natural operating range, the gamma state is accessible in a way that it rarely is for most adults. This is why children learn with a speed and an openness that adults find difficult to replicate, why they absorb languages and patterns and relational information with a kind of effortless depth that gradually reduces as they get older, why the creativity and the wonder and the intuitive knowing of a 5-year-old can feel like something extraordinary. That is not innocence as a metaphor. That is gamma as a biological reality. And then, beginning around age 7, something starts to happen. The world begins to press on the brain in ways that gradually suppress the natural gamma output. The structured environment of formal education, the increasing demands of social navigation, the accumulation of stress, disappointment, correction, comparison, the slow layering on of what adults call maturity, but what the brain registers as the progressive narrowing of its own operating range. Scientists call this the decline effect, the gradual reduction across the years of a human life of access to the frequency that was originally the birthright of every human brain. By the time most people reach adulthood, their gamma output has declined significantly from what it was in childhood. Not disappeared, but suppressed. The signal is still there. The frequency is still present as a possibility. But life, in the form it typically takes in the modern world, has turned it down to the point where it is no longer reliably accessible. And here is where I need you to stay with me very carefully, because what I am about to say connects the scientific reality I just described directly to you, directly to who you are, directly to the specific quality of loss that I believe many of you have felt across the years of your life, and directly to what that loss has actually been about. The people this message is for were not born with average gamma output. You know those children who seem to pick things up faster than the other kids, who asked questions that the adults around them did not quite know what to do with, who felt things at a depth that made ordinary experiences feel almost too vivid, who had a kind of intuitive knowing about people and situations that the adults in their life called gifted or sensitive or unusual, without being able to fully articulate what made them that way. That was gamma. You were born with stronger than average gamma output. That is the source of the sensitivity, the depth, the pattern recognition, the intuitive awareness that has characterized your experience of the world since you were young. The ability to feel what others are feeling before they have expressed it. The tendency to see what is happening underneath what is being said. The discomfort in environments where everyone else seems fine and something in you knows that everything is not fine. The creativity that surprises you. The knowing that arrives before you can explain where it came from. That was not accident. That was your natural frequency. And when the decline effect arrived, as it arrives for every person in every culture, the gap it created in you was larger than for most people, because you had more to lose. The distance between your natural gamma state and the suppressed state that the world gradually pushed you toward was wider than average. And the wider that gap is, the more acutely you feel it, the more real the sense that something vital has gone quiet, the more present the feeling that who you are now is less than who you were, or less than who you know yourself to be capable of being. This is why people like you, chosen ones, who have been carrying a season like the one we have been talking about in this message, feel the loss more acutely than most. Not because you are more fragile, because your birthright was larger. And when a larger natural frequency is suppressed, the silence is louder. And here is where I need you to hear the re-hook, the place where everything we just covered in the last section connects to everything I am saying now. The season you survived, the one where you produced all 7 of those capacities that heaven has no category for, you produced those capacities while your gamma state was being suppressed by maximum external pressure, while running on a depleted frequency, while the external world was pushing down on your natural signal from every direction at once. Heaven was amazed by what you produced. Imagine what becomes possible when the signal is fully restored. When the frequency that your soul was born with, the God-given gamma that was your original operating state, is not just present, but active and accessible, and no longer being suppressed by the accumulated weight of everything you have been carrying, what becomes available to you is not a new version of yourself. It is the most complete version of yourself, the one that operates from the full range of what you were designed to bring. And the work of this next season of your life, the one that everything we have covered in this message has been preparing you for, is going to require that version of you. Before I go to something practical that I want to share with you, I want to give you a framework, because I think this will help you understand something about your own recent history that you may have been interpreting in a way that was costing you more than it needed to. I want to call this the silence currency exchange. Here is the premise. Every moment of faithful silence in a season like the one you have been through, every prayer that went without visible answer, every act of faithfulness that went without visible reward, every grace extended without reciprocity, Every morning, you chose to hold what was true, without a confirming sign that the holding was worth it. None of that was lost. It was exchanged at a rate that the natural world cannot compute, in a currency that operates at the level of the spirit rather than the level of the visible and measurable. And it accumulated. Think about what compound interest actually does to an investment. You put something in, and for a long time, the visible returns are modest. If you look at the account on any given day, it does not appear to be growing at a rate that justifies the patience required to leave it alone. But underneath what is visible, the structure of the thing is working. The rate is being applied. The calculation is ongoing. And then one day you look at the account, and what is there is not proportional to what you consciously added. It is proportional to the entire period during which the calculation was running underneath what you could see. Your season of silence was not a withdrawal from your account. It was a deposit. At compound rates, 3 specific things were accumulating during the silence. The first is what I want to call spiritual capital, the accumulated authority that comes from a soul who has proven its faithfulness without requiring external validation. That kind of authority is not built quickly. It is not built in the easy seasons. It is built in exactly the kind of season you walked through. And it does not disappear when the season ends. It stays with you, and it shows up in the way you move in the next season, in the quality of what you carry, in the depth of the trust that others extend to you, sometimes without knowing why, in the access you have to certain dimensions of wisdom and discernment that only open to someone who has paid the price that your recent season required. The second thing that was accumulating is frequency elevation. Each act of faithful silence, each choice to hold what was true rather than collapse into what was comfortable, was a small upward adjustment in your natural operating frequency. The gamma that was being suppressed by external pressure was at the same time being pulled upward from the inside by the quality of your faithfulness. It was a tug of war, and you kept pulling upward, and the cumulative effect of all of that upward pulling across the full duration of the season is that your baseline has shifted. You are not at the same frequency you were when the season began. You are higher, not because of what happened to you, because of what you chose in the middle of what happened to you. And the third thing that was accumulating is something I described earlier in this message as divine attention. Every moment of invisible faithfulness drew the focus of heaven more fully toward you, not in the sense that God was not already aware, but in the specific sense that what you were doing in those moments, in the specific quality of the choosing, in the unperformable authenticity of how you held what you held, was the kind of thing that does not go unnoticed. That draws the gaze. That produces the response we have been talking about in this message, the thaumazo, the being genuinely astonished. You were not depositing into an account that no one was watching. You were depositing in the full sight of the one who said, when he looked at what you had accumulated, "I was shockingly amazed." Now, I want to share something with you, not as a departure from everything we have been building, not as a commercial break inserted into the middle of a spiritual message, but as the practical expression of exactly what we have been talking about in this section, as the next natural step for someone who has just received what we have been walking through together. There is a neuroscientist named Dr. Robert Lake. He has spent 34 years studying the brain and specifically studying the relationship between brainwave states and human capacity. The relationship between the gamma state and what most people would describe as the kind of clarity, the kind of intuitive knowing, the kind of creative and perceptive depth that feels like it comes from somewhere larger than ordinary conscious thinking. And after decades of research, he developed something. a 7-minute audio track that uses a technology called brain entrainment to pull the brain back into the gamma state from the outside in. Not meditation, which asks the brain to generate a state through sustained internal effort. Not a supplement, which addresses chemistry rather than frequency. Something more precise and more direct than either of those. A sound technology designed to be listened to through headphones in a quiet space that creates the specific auditory conditions under which the brain's natural gamma output is reactivated. Not manufactured, reactivated. It was always there. The track creates the conditions for the brain to find it again. He calls it the genius song. And I share it with you now, not as a product recommendation in the commercial sense, but because the soul who has done what you have done in this last season, who produced the faithfulness and the depth and the grace that we have been talking about in this message while running on a depleted frequency, that soul deserves to know that there is a tool designed for exactly the restoration that would allow everything you have built in the season to be expressed from a place of full capacity rather than depleted reserves. The research that supports what Dr. Lake built comes from institutions that do not stake their credibility on things that do not work. MIT, Harvard, Stanford, Princeton, Columbia. The studies on gamma activation and its relationship to clarity, intuition, and what many researchers describe as accelerated access to higher-order pattern recognition have been replicated across multiple labs. The science is not speculative. What is speculative, what only your own experience can confirm, is whether the tool will do for you what it has done for the thousands of people who have used it. And I want to be honest with you about that, because I think honesty is what this message deserves and what you deserve. This is not a guarantee. It is not a formula. It is a tool, and the way it serves you will depend on where you are and what you bring to it. What I can say is that the underlying science is real. The underlying intention behind it is aligned with everything we have been talking about in this message, and the person it was designed for is the person this message has been speaking to since its first word. Now, let me tell you something about the practical reality of what accessing this kind of gamma restoration normally requires. If you wanted to work with a professional who specializes in this kind of brain entrainment, someone trained in biofeedback therapy who works one-on-one with clients to help them access and sustain elevated brainwave states, you would be looking at sessions that run close to $300 an hour. And the therapeutic process typically requires multiple sessions spread over months to produce the kind of sustained shift in baseline frequency that the research points toward. The home devices that allow you to do similar work independently run in the range of $7,000 for equipment that meets the standard required to actually influence brainwave states at a meaningful level. Dr. Lake took 34 years of understanding of this specific technology and compressed it into a 7-minute audio track, available as a digital file, delivered immediately to your email. Because his mission is not to make this available only to people who can afford $1,000 treatment plans and neurofeedback equipment. His mission is to make it available to the people who need it and who would never have had access to it through those channels. The price he set for this was $49, already a fraction of what a single biofeedback session costs. And for the people who are receiving this message, the people this specific word was carried for, he made it available at $39. Not as a promotional discount in the commercial sense, as a mission-driven decision to reach the people who are watching and listening to content like this because they are genuinely seeking, not because they are casually browsing. And when you receive it at that price, it comes with the track itself, plus 4 additional resources. The first is something called Genius Child, an audio track designed for children to support the same gamma activation in younger minds that are still in the most natural phase of that access. The second is a rare book, the original text that the film you may have seen called The Secret drew its central ideas from, a more grounded and practical treatment of the subject of conscious intention, which normally runs close to $20 on its own. The third is a guided visualization through 4 specific areas of life: wealth, relationships, health, and purpose, designed to create internal alignment with the direction you are choosing to move. And the fourth is a printed infographic of 5 specific practices that the research consistently identifies as the most significant daily habits for maintaining the kind of elevated frequency we have been talking about in this section. All of that, the track, the 4 bonuses, and a complete money-back guarantee that carries no conditions and no questions and no required number of uses before it can be invoked, is available at $39. If after using it you do not feel any shift, you receive every cent of that back. The only risk in receiving it is the risk of not receiving it and remaining where you are. One more thing I want to say about this, because it matters and because there are people who have tried to replicate what Dr. Lake built and who have put counterfeit versions of the Genius song on various platforms and in various formats. Audio tracks that carry the name but not the technology, that offer the label without the brain entrainment, science that makes the actual product what it is. If you go looking on streaming platforms or elsewhere on the internet, what you will find may carry the same name and bear no resemblance to what it claims to be. The only way to receive the actual technology, the track built on Dr. Lake's 34 years of research, with the 4 bonuses and the guarantee, is through the link that is in the pinned comment and in the description of this video, not through searching, not through finding it somewhere else, only through that link. If your spirit resonates with what I just described, if something in what I said about the gamma state and about the silence currency exchange and about what becomes available to you when your natural frequency is restored felt like a next step rather than an interruption, the information is in the pinned comment. Investigate only if you feel genuinely led toward it. And now, I want to ask something of you before we continue, because what has been shared in this message, from the beginning through everything we have just covered, has been built for a specific person, for you. And there are other people in your life right now, people you know, and people you will never meet, who are sitting in the middle of a hard season very much like the one we have been talking about, who do not yet know that heaven is watching what they are doing with a quality of attention that will produce the same kind of response that we have been unpacking in this message. Before we move forward, gently press the like on this message, not as a favor to a channel, but so that what has been shared here can find its way to someone who is 3 days into the darkest week of their year and who needs to hear, as urgently as you may have needed to hear it, that what they are producing in the hard season is not going unnoticed. Let your like be the thing that carries this word further than it would have gone on its own. And now, there is something else I need to address before we move into the final sections of this message, because I know that some of you are sitting with something that, if we do not name it and release it, is going to prevent you from fully inhabiting everything we have been building toward. Something sitting in the spirit, quiet but present. Something that is pushing back against what was spoken over you in this message. Something that sounds like a voice saying, "Is this really for me?" I need to speak to that voice directly, and I need to speak to the obstacle underneath it, because what you carry coming out of this season is too important to be left trapped behind a belief about yourself that was never true to begin with. That is where we are going next. Let me speak to what is sitting in the spirit of some of you right now. Because I know it is there. I have shared enough of these messages, spoken to enough people who have walked through the kind of season we have been talking about, to know that there is a voice that arrives at a moment like this one. A quiet voice, not hostile, not loud, just persistent. And it says something that sounds almost like humility, but is not actually humility at all. It says, "This is not for me." Or it says, "People like me do not get spoken about this way." Or it says, "I hear what is being said, and it is beautiful, but there is a distance between those words and the truth of who I actually know myself to be. And in that distance lives something I need to address before I can fully receive what this message has been building." I want to name that voice, and I want to name what is underneath it, because what you carry coming out of this season is too important to remain locked behind a belief about yourself that was formed by experiences that were never fair to you in the first place. The belief I want to address is unworthiness, and I want to be very specific about what I mean. Not the casual version of feeling unqualified, not the temporary uncertainty that arrives before any significant new thing. I mean the deeper, more structural version, the one that has been running underneath your experience for long enough that it has started to feel like a fact about you rather than a story that was told to you. Unworthiness is not the truth about you. It is the scar tissue of a truth that was distorted, and I want to show you 3 specific places where it formed, not because identifying the origin is going to make it disappear instantly, but because when you see where a belief actually came from, it loses some of the authority it has been borrowing from your automatic agreement with it. The first place it formed is in early experiences where love was conditional, where what you received from the people who were supposed to love you most was connected to your performance, to how well you met their needs, to how successfully you avoided the behaviors that disappointed them, to how effectively you managed your own complexity in a way that did not create discomfort for the people around you. And in those experiences, your mind, which was still forming and which was doing the best it could with what it had available to it, drew a conclusion. The conclusion was, I am acceptable when I perform correctly and unacceptable when I do not. And that conclusion, formed early and reinforced often, did not stay in the past. It came with you. The second place it formed is in the accumulated experience of giving more than you received. There is a particular form of internalized diminishment that comes from repeated patterns where your generosity was taken for granted, where your care went without reciprocal care, where you invested deeply in relationships or situations that returned significantly less than you put in. And, over time, without deliberately choosing this conclusion, something in you began to absorb the lesson that the world was reflecting back at you. The lesson that your presence and your offering were worth less than what you were giving. That is not a lesson the world had the right to teach you, but it taught it anyway, and some part of you has been carrying it. The third place it formed is in the comparison that arrived and stayed, the watching of other people's visible progress while your own season looked still, the measuring of your private experience against the public version of someone else's story, the gap between where you are and where you thought you would be by now, or where it appears to you that everyone around you already is. And in that gap, the unworthiness found oxygen. It found the space to say, "See, the evidence confirms what I have been telling you. You are behind. You are less than. You do not deserve what the people ahead of you are receiving." I want to speak plainly to all 3 of those formation points. The love that was conditional was a reflection of the capacity of the people offering it. It was not a measurement of your worth. The giving that went without equal return was a reflection of the depth of who you are. It was not evidence that your depth is worth less than what others offer, and the gap between your private progress and someone else's public position is not a scorecard. It is the result of measuring two completely different journeys by the same ruler, a ruler that was never designed to accurately measure either one. Unworthiness makes sense, given what formed it, but it is not the truth about you. And the very fact that what was said about you in the presence of heaven's angels was what we have been covering in this message is the most precise possible refutation of the story that unworthiness has been telling you about yourself. Now, alongside that, I want to address something else, because for some of you, the internal friction is not just the question of whether you deserve this. It is something more specific, more complex, and, in many ways, more sophisticated. It is the fear of receiving it. It sounds like this. What if I receive this elevation and then fail to live up to it? What if I step into the identity this message is pointing me toward and collapse under the weight of what that identity carries? What if this is real and I receive it, and then I become visible in a way that exposes something underneath that I am not sure is ready to be seen? If you have felt any version of that while listening to this message, I want you to hold it carefully for a moment, because I have something important to say about it. That fear is not a sign that you are not ready. That fear is one of the clearest signs that you are. Here is what I mean. There is a specific kind of person who enters significant visibility or significant responsibility without fear, without any internal hesitation, without any sense of the weight of what they are stepping into. And the people who crash, who receive elevation and are then destroyed by it, who step into visibility and are then consumed by what comes with it, are disproportionately found in that group. Not because courage is a disqualifier, but because the absence of any healthy fear about the weight of a responsibility is often the sign that the person has not yet reckoned with what the weight actually is. You have reckoned with it. Your fear is not a weakness. It is evidence of wisdom. It is the sign of someone who understands enough about the weight to be appropriately awed by it. And that understanding, that capacity to feel the real gravity of what you are being moved toward, is itself the thing that makes you capable of handling it in a way that someone without that awareness simply cannot. What feels like holding yourself back in fear is actually your soul conducting a serious assessment of a serious assignment. And a serious assessment conducted by the right soul always ends the same way. Not with withdrawal, with informed and grounded readiness. You are not afraid because you are inadequate. You are afraid because you are awake. And being awake is exactly what this season was designed to produce in you. Now, I want to tell you about someone, a chosen one, no name, because his story is not about him. It is about the pattern, and the pattern is going to be familiar. 11 months ago, this man was inside what felt like a comprehensive collapse. Not one area of his life that had gone wrong, 3 at once. A business contract that he had spent 2 years building toward was cancelled without warning, and with it, a financial structure he had organized the rest of his life around. At the same time, 2 of the closest relationships in his life fractured in the same quarter, in ways that made him question his own judgment about people and about himself. And, in the middle of all of that, he lost his sense of clarity about his calling. The thing he had believed he was here to do stopped feeling available to him, not like he was far from it, like it was not there anymore. He told me later that what he felt in that period was not just pain, it was a kind of erasure, like the map of who he was and what he was doing had gone blank. And then, instead of trying to rebuild quickly, instead of going back out into the world and forcing something to move, he did something that went against every instinct he had. He went quiet. 40 days of deliberate, faithful invisibility. He stepped back from every context where he had been trying to perform his way back to stability. He stopped posting. He stopped announcing. He stopped measuring his progress by external signals. He applied what I described to you as the silence currency exchange, not because he had a name for it, but because something in him knew that what needed to happen next could not be forced. It had to be received. And receiving required a quality of stillness that his previous pace of life had not been providing. On day 37, a company that he had never contacted, in a field adjacent to his own, but that he had never pursued, reached out to him directly. They had been observing the body of work he had done quietly, not the recent performance, the older and more substantive things he had built when he was not thinking about how they would be received. They offered him a contract for a collaboration that was precisely aligned with what his actual calling was. Not the version of it he had been performing, but the real version underneath, at terms that exceeded what he had lost, more than doubled it. He did not manufacture that outcome. He did not force it. He withdrew into faithful silence and let the season do what the season was designed to do. And on day 37, the silence paid out. I share that not as a formula. Your day 37 will not look like his. The specific form of the return is not mine to predict and is not something I will pretend to promise. But the principle operating underneath his story is the same principle that has been operating underneath yours. Faithful silence accumulates. What is deposited in the quiet is not lost. And when the timing is right, what was held during the season of holding comes forward in a form that is proportional, not to what you announced, but to what you deposited when no one was watching. And now I need to give you something, not an instruction, a permission. Because I believe there are things you have been waiting for someone to say you are allowed to do. Things you have been holding back on because the allowing was not clearly given. Things you have been carrying a quiet guilt about because someone, somewhere, made you feel that doing them was selfish or wrong, or a betrayal of something you owed them. Let me give the permission now. You are allowed to outgrow people. Not because they are bad, not because the history you share is worthless, but because what you are becoming requires movement in a direction that some relationships were never designed to follow. And honoring that movement is not abandonment. It is faithfulness to what you are being called toward. You are allowed to outgrow places. The environments that shaped you in a previous season are not required to be the environments that hold you in this one. You are allowed to belong somewhere different than where you began. You are allowed to outgrow old versions of yourself. The story you told about who you were, the one that made sense 3 years ago, is allowed to be released. The new version does not need to carry the old story into every room it enters. You are allowed to stop explaining yourself to people who have decided what you are. Not every observer of your life is entitled to a defense. Not every misunderstanding requires correction from you. Some of the energy you have been spending on that, you are allowed to redirect toward what you are building. You are allowed to protect what God is building in you without apologizing for the protection. Boundaries are not rejection. Distance is not cruelty. Choosing carefully who has access to the most vulnerable parts of what you are carrying is not selfishness. It is stewardship. And stewardship of something this significant is not optional. You are allowed to receive the honor that heaven has already declared over you, without shrinking from it, without immediately deflecting it, without performing a humility that actually functions as a refusal. You are allowed to receive it and let it land, and let it change the way you see yourself and move through the world going forward. You are allowed to believe, genuinely believe, without qualification or condition, that what was said about you in the presence of the angels is truer than anything the years of diminishing told you about yourself. And you do not owe anyone, not history, not habit, not the voices that reduced you, not the relationships that took more than they gave, not the season that tried its hardest to make you someone smaller, a single apology for becoming exactly who you were always intended to be. If something in you just shifted when I said that, if some held tension somewhere in your spirit released even slightly when those words landed, I want you to type something right now in the comments. Just 2 words. Type I release, not as a performance, as the declaration that something you have been holding, some version of the weight that we have been talking about in this message, you are choosing to set down right now, in this moment, as an act of your own will. Type I release. And carry what remains into where we are going next. Because what we are going into now is the naming, the full, specific, unhurried naming of who you actually are, not who the season tried to make you feel like, not who the unworthiness story has been describing, who you have always been, and who this season, this formation, this whole long process we have been walking through together in this message has been bringing fully to the surface. Let me name who you are. Not who you are working toward, not who you will be when the next season arrives and the next breakthrough lands and the next confirmation comes through. Who you are, right now, in this moment. The version of you that this season, this formation, this long and costly process we have been unpacking together in this message has been bringing to the surface. Because there is a version of you that exists underneath all of the titles the world has given you, and underneath all of the roles you have been playing, and underneath all of the expectations that have been placed on you by people who did not always know what they were looking at. And that version is not a future possibility. It is a present reality, and I want to name it out loud. The first thing I want to name is this: you are a spiritual warrior. And I want to be very precise about what that means. Because the phrase sounds strong, and it is strong, but the strength it describes is not the obvious kind. A spiritual warrior does not fight with noise. A spiritual warrior does not assert themselves by being the loudest presence in the room, or by staging public confrontations, or by making their power visible in ways that require an audience. A spiritual warrior holds ground in silence. And that is what you did. In the most real and specific sense of what those words mean, the battle that unfolded in your recent season, the one that appeared on the surface to be about circumstances and relationships and outcomes and timelines, was not primarily a battle in the visible realm. It was fought in the spirit, in the place where the decision was made again and again to hold what was true, to grip what was real, to maintain the quality of character that the pressure was trying to erode. And you held that ground without anyone giving you a medal for holding it, without anyone even knowing fully what the holding was costing you, without any external confirmation that the ground you were holding was worth the cost of holding it. That is not ordinary. A spiritual warrior is not someone who has never been shaken. It is someone who was shaken and held anyway. And that is who you are. The second thing I want to name: you are a wounded healer. And I want to say something about this identity that most people miss when they encounter the phrase. The wound is not incidental to the healing. It is not the unfortunate backstory that the healer had to overcome before becoming capable of the work. The wound is the qualification. It is the specific mechanism by which the healing becomes real rather than theoretical. You cannot give genuine medicine for a wound you have never been inside of. You can give information about it. You can offer frameworks for understanding it. You can extend sympathy from the outside of the experience, and that sympathy is not worthless. But the specific medicine that comes from someone who has been in the wound and has emerged from it carrying something real, that medicine is only available from the source that has paid the price of the wound itself. And you have paid it, in full, in this season. Which means what you now carry is not a general capacity for compassion. It is a specific and credentialed depth, the kind that can reach people in the specific quality of pain that you have been inside of, and offer them something that only someone who has been there first can give. The wound is not your liability going forward. The wound is your unique qualification. The third thing, you are a cycle breaker. There are patterns that were running before you arrived. Generational patterns, relational patterns, systemic patterns, ways of moving through the world and through relationships and through difficulty that have been part of the inheritance passed along to you before you were aware enough to examine what you were receiving. Some of those patterns served the people who carried them before you. Some of them did not, and some of them were actively limiting what you could believe about yourself, limiting what you could ask for, limiting what you could expect to receive and to become. And in this season, in the process of everything that fell away and everything that was built, something happened to those patterns. They changed, not cosmetically, not at the level of adjusted habits or modified behaviors, at the level where patterns actually live, in the interior, in the story that runs beneath the choices, in the belief system that generates the behavior rather than in the behavior itself. What changed in you does not stay in you. It changes after you. The people who know you from this point forward, the people who will come to you for what you carry, the people who will be influenced by the version of you that this season formed, they will encounter a different set of patterns than the ones that were handed to you. And some of them will be freed by what you changed. Not because you are performing something different, because you became something different. All the way down to where patterns live. That is who you are, a cycle breaker. The fourth thing, you are a light bearer. And I want to address something that I think many of you have been doing with this particular quality of yours, because you have known, on some level, for a long time, that you carry something into a room that changes the quality of what the room can hold. You have felt the shift that happens in certain conversations when you speak. You have noticed the way people around you become slightly more honest, slightly more real, slightly more willing to go somewhere true rather than staying in the comfortable and shallow version of the interaction. And you have often, perhaps habitually, tried to dial it back, to make yourself smaller, to make the light you carry less visible, to give the people around you who seemed uncomfortable with the intensity of what you bring the relief of encountering a less complete version of you. I want to speak directly to that habit. The light you carry is not yours to manage for the comfort of people who are not yet ready for it. The light is not optional equipment that you add when the environment invites it and remove when the environment resists it. The light is what you are, and the season you just came through was not designed to reduce it. It was designed to refine it, to burn off the impurities in how you carry it, not the carrying itself. You are a light bearer, and the world you are moving into is not asking you to carry less. It is waiting for you to carry it without apology. And the fifth thing, you are a voice. This is the identity that I think will resonate most deeply with the people this message is specifically for. Because a voice is not simply someone who speaks. Anyone can speak. A voice is someone who sees what others feel, but cannot yet name. Who carries words that belong to people who do not yet have the language? Who sits in a space and senses the unspoken thing in the room, the thing everyone is orbiting around, but no one has said out loud, and finds the words that bring it into the light, where it can be addressed and released. This is why you are drawn to content like this. Not because you need to be told these things, you already know them, but you are in a process of learning the language of what you already carry. And as you learn that language, as you find the words for what has been living in you without a name, you become capable of giving those same words to other people who are carrying what you once carried without a name. And the impact of that, of being the person who says the thing that someone else has been holding silently for years, of giving language to what was previously unspeakable, cannot be measured in the ordinary ways we measure impact. It lands at a depth that visible metrics cannot reach. 5 identities, not aspirational ones, present ones, who you are right now, who you have been all along, and who this season confirmed at full depth in a way that cannot be undone. Now, I want to give you a framework, because what I have just named for you is real, and I want you to have a practical way of accessing it in the ordinary moments when the naming does not feel as clear as it does in a message like this one. I call this the witness protocol. The premise is this: most of us evaluate ourselves from the inside, from our own subjective, filtered, often exhausted perspective. We look at what we just did and we assess it through the lens of how it felt, or how it compared to what we expected of ourselves, or how it was received by the people around us. And that lens is not always accurate. It is distorted by our history, by our unworthiness story, by the accumulation of past experiences that were not always fair to us. And so, the evaluation we produce is often significantly harsher than the truth. The witness protocol is a deliberate practice of stepping outside that distortion, of seeing yourself, just for a moment, from the vantage point of the one who was watching your season with the quality of attention we have been talking about in this entire message. It has 3 steps, and you can do all 3 of them right where you are, right now, without moving, without needing anything other than the interior of your own mind. The first step is to pause. Whatever you are in the middle of evaluating about yourself, whatever the internal conversation is that is running the most critical or the most discouraging commentary right now, simply notice it. You do not need to argue with it or silence it. Just notice it is there. The second step is to observe from the outside. Ask a single question. Not what do I think about what I just did, but what would God see, looking at the specific choice I just made, from the place of full knowledge and full context, and complete understanding of what it cost and what it came from. Not God as a judge assessing for compliance. God as the one who was watching your season with the specific quality of attention that produced the response we have been unpacking in this message. And the third step is to receive what comes from that observation, without immediately filtering it through your self-criticism, without looking for reasons to discount it. Let the divine evaluation of that choice land. Let it sit for a moment before your internal critic has a chance to argue with it. This is not about bypassing honest self-reflection. Honest self-reflection is valuable and important. This is about making sure that the voice doing the reflecting is not the one that was distorted by everything we addressed in the previous section. It is about giving the truest and most complete observer in the universe, the one who produced a specific and documented response to the quality of your faithfulness in your hardest season, the opportunity to also weigh in on who you are right now. Practice it once a day, at any moment, applied to any decision, even a small one. What would God see? And then let yourself actually receive the answer. And now, the second framework. I call this the amazement standard. This is a way of recognizing when you are operating from the specific frequency that produced the response we have been building this entire message around. When you are in the place that caused heaven to pause. Not as a performance of that place, not as an attempt to recreate it for its own sake, but as a way of knowing, in real time, when your choices are coming from the deepest and most real version of who you are. It has 3 markers, and all 3 need to be present for the standard to be met. The first marker is that you chose the harder thing when the easier thing was available and defensible. Not harder as in more dramatic or more visible, harder as in more costly to the interior, more demanding of the real you, more requiring of the qualities that the formation season built in you, rather than the ones that come easily to anyone without that formation. The second marker is that the choice cost you something you did not have to spend. You were not required to be as generous as you were. You were not required to extend as much grace as you extended. You were not required to hold with as much care as you held. You chose to spend more than the situation demanded. Because that is what you do. Because that is who you are. And the third marker is that you made the choice without requiring external validation that it was right. You moved because the interior compass said this is the right direction, not because someone confirmed it, not because the outcome was already visible, because the knowing was there, and you trusted it enough to act on it before the proof arrived. When all 3 are present, you are operating from the frequency that moved heaven, not performing that frequency for an audience, living from it. And that is what this next season of your life is being built on. If what has been shared in this message, from the very beginning through everything we have just covered, has been a part of what you have been waiting to receive, I want to invite you to stay in this space. There is more coming in seasons ahead. More of this kind of depth, more of this specific quality of word. And if you want to continue receiving it, choose to remain in this community, not as a favor to a channel, as a decision to keep yourself in the proximity of what you just experienced, because what feeds you in the right direction deserves to be something you return to. And now, before we enter the final and most sacred section of this message, I want to take you somewhere. In your spirit, not in your imagination, but in the deeper place where the things we have been talking about actually live, I want you to do something without moving, without closing anything or shifting anything physically, just in your interior. I want you to go back to the hardest moment of the season we have been talking about, not to relive it, not to drag yourself back into the pain of it, but to look at it from the outside, from the vantage point of everything you now know. Go back to the specific moment, the one where the weight was at its heaviest, where the silence was at its loudest, where the choice to hold on felt most impossible and most costly. See yourself in that moment. And now, look at what you chose. See the choice you made in that moment, from the outside, from the place of full information, with the knowledge that what was being formed in that moment was what we have been naming in this message, that the pressure of that specific moment was producing something that even the most extraordinary created beings in existence were not equipped to produce. that God was in the room, that God was watching, and that what he saw in the quality of the choice you made in that specific moment, in that specific instant, when the easier path was right there and you did not take it, produced in him the response that this entire message has been built around. Let that land. Not in your analysis, in the part of you that carried that moment without knowing what it was. This is not a visualization exercise. This is a commissioning. This is the moment where you look at what you survived and receive, actually receive, the identity that was being formed inside it. The spiritual warrior, the wounded healer, the cycle breaker, the light bearer, the voice. That is who was in that moment. That is who chose in that moment. That is who God was amazed by in that moment. And that is who you are walking into the final section of this message as. We have arrived at the place this message has been carrying you toward. And before we enter the sacred closing, I want to take a moment in the space between what came before and what comes next, because I do not want us to move into it without first acknowledging the ground we have covered together. What you have walked through in this message is not small, and what you have received in it deserves a moment of standing in it before we move to the final and most important thing I want to speak over your life. You entered this message carrying the weight of a season you had not yet fully understood. You leave it knowing what that season was doing. You entered this message wondering, at some level, whether the silence of that season meant you were unseen. You leave it knowing that heaven was watching, with a quality of attention that produced a response we spent 5 sections unpacking. You entered this message carrying beliefs about yourself that were formed by experiences that were not fair to you. You leave it having heard those beliefs named, examined, and released. You entered this message not fully knowing who you were on the other side of what you just survived. You leave it with 5 identities named not as aspirational targets, but as present realities. The spiritual warrior, the wounded healer, the cycle breaker, the light bearer, the voice. You are not the same person who arrived at the beginning of this word, not because this message changed you, because this message named what the season already formed. And I want to say something before we go any further into this closing, because right now, all across the world, there are chosen ones sitting in a version of the season we have been talking about. They are in the middle of it right now, not on the other side of it, in the middle, and they do not yet know what you now know. They do not yet have the language for what they are producing in their silence. They do not yet know that heaven is watching their faithfulness with the same quality of attention we have spent this entire message describing. If someone comes to mind as I say this, if a face appears, if you think of someone who has been unusually quiet lately, someone who has been carrying something they have not fully named, someone whose season has been going on long enough that the people around them have stopped asking how they are doing, send this to them, not as a suggestion, not as a casual share, as an intentional act of carrying this word to the person it was also meant for, because you were not brought to this message only for yourself. Part of what you carry out of it is the responsibility to make sure it reaches the next person who needed it as urgently as you needed it today. And now, we enter the closing. I want to begin here, in gratitude, because before anything else is spoken, before any declaration is made, or any release is called for, or any activation is pronounced, I want to honor what we walked through to get here. This message was not light. It asked something of you. It asked you to stay, to receive what was difficult to receive, to remain open to truths about yourself that your unworthiness story was trying to argue with in real time. And you stayed, you received, you remained open, and, for that, there is a quality of honor that belongs in this space before anything else is said. I am grateful for the season that brought you here, not the pain of it, but the formation of it, for everything the wilderness produced that the easy path could never have offered, for the chazak, the grip from within, that you maintained when the grip was the most costly thing you possessed, for the 7 things you produced that angels have no capacity for the diamond that the pressure was always building, for the version of you that sits here now, not in spite of what you walked through, but because of it. And I want to acknowledge what the source saw, not in the general sense, in the specific sense. He saw every weight you carried that no one else had full access to. Every private morning when the choosing happened, before any external signal gave you a reason to choose. Every moment of faithfulness that lived in the rooms of your spirit, where the audience was exactly one. Every grace extended when grace was the most expensive available option. Every time you bent toward breaking and then did not break. Every moment of becoming that happened in the dark, without a mirror, without confirmation, without a single external witness to tell you that the becoming was real. He saw every moment. He was in every moment. And what he saw moved him in the specific and irreversible way that we have named in this message. Now, there are things in this space that need to be set down, and I want to name them one by one, and as each one is named, I want you to let your spirit release it. You do not need to do anything with your body. You do not need to speak out loud. In the interior, in the spirit, simply hear the name of each thing and let the permission to release it arrive. Every belief that you are too much for some people and not enough for others, every story that placed you in that impossible middle, every version of the message that your worth is variable based on how well you are performing for the people around you. Release. Every comparison that measured your private progress against someone else's public position, every moment you looked at where they were and used it as evidence about where you should be, every ruler that was never designed to measure your specific journey, but that you kept applying to yourself anyway. Release. Every weight you picked up in someone else's story and carried as if it belonged to you, every burden that was handed to you by someone who did not have the right to hand it, every expectation that was placed on you before you were old enough or aware enough to examine whether it fit. Release. Every old story about what your life is allowed to become, every ceiling that was constructed above your expectations by other people's limitations, by your own previous seasons of low hope, by the accumulated evidence of difficulty, making an argument against possibility. Release. Every residue of the shame that attached itself to the suffering, the quiet, persistent sense that the hard season was somehow your fault, that a person more worthy or more capable or more spiritually developed would not have needed to go through what you went through. That is not true, and it was never true. Release. Every voice that called your faithfulness foolishness, every person or experience that suggested that what you were holding on to was naive, that trusting the process was weakness, that the quality of your endurance was somehow evidence of a flaw in your character rather than a mark of extraordinary depth. Release. Every version of yourself that you have been holding on to because it is familiar, even though you have already outgrown it. The old story, the old ceiling, the old way of moving through the world that belonged to a previous season and that you have been carrying into this one out of habit rather than genuine fit. Release. And every doubt that what was spoken about you in the presence of the angels is actually for you. Every hesitation, every part of you that reached for the word this message carried and then pulled back because receiving it fully felt like more than you knew how to hold. Release that too. You are allowed to receive this fully, without conditions. Now, I want to call something forward. The spiritual warrior in you, the one who holds ground in silence, who fights the real battle in the spirit and shows up to the visible world with a settled and grounded authority that does not need noise to establish itself. I call that forward. Come forward. Not as a future possibility, as the present reality of who you are right now and who you have been all along. The wounded healer in you, the one whose specific wound has become the specific medicine, whose credential depth is the direct product of everything the season asked of you, who carries a quality of access to people in pain that only comes from someone who has been inside the pain first. I call that forward. Come forward. The world you are moving into needs what you carry, not in spite of where it came from, but because of where it came from. The cycle breaker in you, the one in whose life a long and heavy chain of patterns that were never fair to the people who carried them, is ending, the one whose interior change is generational in its reach. Even if it is never announced or celebrated publicly, I call that forward. Come forward. What you changed in this season does not stay in you. It changes everything that comes after you. And that is not a small thing. That is one of the largest things a single life can do. The light bearer in you, the one who is done apologizing for the quality of what they carry, who is learning to walk into rooms as the full version of themselves rather than the edited version that fits more comfortably within other people's expectations. I call that forward. Come forward without apology. The light is not optional, and the world you are entering is not asking for the reduced version. And the voice in you, the one who carries words that belong to other people, who sees what others feel but cannot name, who is in the process of finding the language for what has been living in them without language. I call that forward. Come forward. The words you are learning to speak are not yours alone. They belong to the specific people who are waiting for you to say what they have not been able to say. And they are waiting for the version of you that comes out of this message. Not the previous one, this one. I speak over you now, the covering that what is being built in you needs as it moves from the hidden season into the visible one. Not every person who will encounter you in the next season will understand what you have become or where you are going. Some of them will be confused by the version of you that walks out of this message. Some of them will resist it. Some of them will try, without malice and without awareness, to pull you back into the previous version because that version was more comfortable for them. I cover you from that pull. I cover what is being built from the force of premature exposure, from the instinct to announce what is not yet ready to be announced, from the self-sabotage that has shown up in your life at other moments of nearness to breakthrough. What is being built is covered. What is being formed is protected. What is being prepared in you is guarded from every force, internal and external, that would expose it before it is ready to be seen. And now, I want to speak a declaration over your life, and I want to do it in the voice of the one who was watching your season. In the words I believe the Spirit has placed on my heart for you, with all the reverence and care that a word like this deserves. I hear the Father speaking over you in this moment. My child, what you walked through in this last season was not hidden from me, not for a single moment. Not in the hours when you felt most alone, not in the mornings when the choosing was hardest, not in the spaces where the silence lasted longer than seemed bearable. I was in every one of those moments, not watching from a distance, in the middle of them, in the specific interior place where the cost was being paid and the choice was being made. And I want you to know what I saw from inside that place rather than from outside it. I saw someone who gripped what was true when letting go would have been the easiest and most understandable thing to do. I saw someone who extended love from a hand that had been wounded and kept it extended even after the wound was not acknowledged. I saw someone who kept becoming in the dark, without a mirror, without confirmation, without a single signal from the external world that the becoming was producing anything worth continuing. I saw all 7 things that I have never asked of my angels, and I saw them all at once, in the same soul, in the same season, at real cost. And when the full picture of what you were doing came together, when I could see not just the individual choices, but the cumulative shape of what they formed, I turned to those who were beside me, and I said, "Look at this. Look at what this one is doing. Look at how they are carrying what I gave them to carry." And they looked, and they had no category for it, because it is outside the range of what I have ever given them to experience. You handled it better than they would have. Not because you are greater than they are, because you are different from them in a way that matters. You chose from within limitation. You trusted from within darkness. You loved from within wound. You became from within invisibility. And none of those things are in their experience. They are in yours. And I want to say it plainly, without poetry, without ceremony, as simply and as directly as I can say it. I was shockingly amazed by you, not as a comfort, as a fact, as the actual and specific and documented response of the one who sees everything, who knows everything, who has observed every season of every life across the full length of human history, to the specific quality of what you chose to do and who you chose to be in the season that nearly broke you. You are extraordinary, not by your own evaluation, by mine, and I am not finished with what I began in you in this season. What was formed here is not the ceiling, it is the floor. What is being built on top of it is proportional to the depth of the foundation, and the foundation is extraordinary. Go now, not with the weight of what you were carrying when you arrived at this message, with the knowledge of who I know you to be, with the knowledge of what I said about you when I turned to the angels and showed them what you were doing, with the knowledge that the thaumazo, the genuine and personal and profound astonishment of the one who made you, is the most accurate description of what I feel when I look at what you did. You are my chosen one, and I am shockingly amazed by you. I want you to hear that, not just process it. Do not rush out of this moment. Do not immediately move to the next thing. Do not let the ordinary pace of the ordinary day pull you forward before what was just spoken has had the chance to settle into the place in you that it was sent for. I want you to sit in this frequency, right where you are, for 60 seconds. Let the full weight of what was just spoken over you move from your hearing into the deeper place where it belongs. The place that has been carrying the season without knowing that heaven was watching it with amazement. Let the word reach that place. It is done. It is sealed. You receive it. And so it is. Amen. Before you leave this space, one more thing. If what was spoken over you in this closing landed in a place that is real, if something settled in you that had not been settled before, if there is a version of the weight you arrived with that you are leaving without, let your agreement be felt. Gently press the like on this message, not as a metric, as your amen without words, as the quiet agreement of a spirit that received something it had been waiting for. And in the comments right now, I want you to type 2 words, I am ready. Not for someone else to see, for yourself, as the declaration that something shifted in this message, that the person who arrived at the beginning of this word and the person who is typing those 2 words right now are not in the same place. That what was named in this message has been received. That what was released has been set down. That what was activated is awake. Type, "I am ready." Or if your spirit is resonating at the frequency of what we talked about in the section on divine confirmation, type 777. For every chosen one in this space who is entering the new season on the other side of the formation. For every soul who arrived at this message carrying what we have been naming and who is leaving it carrying something entirely different. Until the next time this word finds you, walk in the identity that was declared over you today. Not the identity you had before the season, not the one you are still waiting to earn, the one that was named in this message, the one that heaven confirmed in the only language that matters. You have been seen, you have been honored,